Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Louh, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice.
Probably the hardest job there is. There's so many challenges, especially today, from how to navigate talking to our children about social.
Got talent, some of them, they have a sense of humor, they're learning, and with that same type of approach, we can't let the challenges be the dominant thing we think of a team. They need us to be present, and it makes a difference if they have a sense that my parents like me and are interested in me.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have that orientation as parents, it really changes things, because they say really insightful things, and they're seeing things, and they're learning, and they're really beautiful. So that's kind of the context I think that we need as parents to be thinking, this is a person is becoming a person in front of me.
Mm.
Dr. Mamalakis, tell us, what role do parents really play in helping teens navigate, the adolescent years?
To think of my role.
There you go. Okay.
Because, it's tough. And, my kids will backtalk me. And my instinct is I would never talk to my parents like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the world can seem scary. Like, what are they doing now? Are they on their phone again? Are they off with friends? I like to think of my role and our role as parents is we want to walk alongside them.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be journeying with them and recognizing that this is a journey of, they're going to oscillate between acting like little children and then kind of these moments of real maturity and insight. Mm-hmm. So I think is to be present, be a presence in their lives. We'll try and be home when they're home. We are involved. We know their school, get to know their friends and their friends' parents, learning to listen to them. I mean, we think about journeying, it's about really learning who they are. And it includes, setting limits and navigating with them. But ultimately, think about how do we talk to our kids about these issues. We're not going to have some major discussion with them, and now they will understand what the church thinks or how to understand the world. The kinds of shorter conversations that happen,
Dr. Phillip, I think we're having some
the day, or they come up, but we're.
Yeah, Dr. Phillip, I don't know if you can hear us. You're kind of coming in and out. What we're going to do is we're going to take a break.
I can hear you perfect.
Yeah, you're on our end. I think you're just kind of coming in and out. But what I'll do is I'll take a break. I'll let our producer work with you to see if we can kind of clear some of because I want to make sure our listeners are hearing great messages that you're sharing. So we'll take a break. Right back with you here. Hello.
Live with the Louhs with Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne will be back in a moment. Give them a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. They would love to hear from you.
The Orthodox Christian tradition is filled with wisdom and guidance about the biblical path of salvation. Yet this guidance remains largely inaccessible to parents and often disconnected from the parenting challenges we face in our homes. Parenting Toward the Kingdom by Dr. Phillip Mamalakis, PhD, will help you make the connections between the spiritual life as we understand it in the Orthodox Church and the ongoing challenges of raising children. It takes the best child development research and connects it with the timeless truths of our Christian faith to offer you real strategies for navigating the challenges of daily life.
I try and say, well, here's what parenting is, and then here are some strategies for how we actually parent, and then here's how we understand some of the important aspects of parenting.
You can find Parenting Toward the Kingdom and more at store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
Are you struggling in your walk with Christ? Do you want to rediscover your reason for living, the person you were created to be? Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan gives you the keys to unlock areas of your life that hold you back from fully experiencing the renewal and transformation God has in mind for you. Co-authored by a priest and a psychologist, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Louh, Renewing You combines principles of spiritual growth with psychological tools to help you become your best self, fully connected with God's purpose for you. To purchase this book, please go to store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Live with the Lows and Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne. Do you have a question for the Lows? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here once again is Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, welcome back, everyone. And sorry for that technical difficulties that we were having, but we are speaking tonight about parenting our adolescents, and we're here with a very good friend of ours, Dr. Phillip Mamalakis, who is the author of a great book called Parenting Towards the Kingdom. It's published by Ancient Faith. And we do invite you, though, to join the conversation tonight. We'd love to hear from you. If you have a question for Dr. Phillip or for us, call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com.
So, Dr. Phillip, right before the break, we were just checking in with the role that really parents play during the adolescent years, because certainly it's quite different than our role when children are in early childhood.
In some ways, it is different, and in some ways, it's not different. What's different is we don't need to dress them most of the time, right? We don't need to feed them most of the time, and we don't need to put them to bed most of the time. What's the same is that journey with our kids kind of starts when they're young, that we are a presence in their lives when they're young, and they need us in many ways when they're really young, in ways they don't when they're older, but they need our same type of presence. Because again, they're trying to figure out life. We're wired to try and make sense of the world. And what's best for kids as they go through high school is that they have a presence. They have their mom present in their life and their dad present. But if that presence is a controlling presence, let's say they're not free to think, or they're not free to feel, or they're not free to ask questions, that's not going to create an atmosphere where they're going to kind of want us around. They're going to be instinctively saying, I need space to think. I need space to feel. I need space to ask questions. So our role is to walk alongside them. And that when we walk alongside them and kind of are thinking more about how can I be responsive and curious to what is my child experiencing and how is my child thinking and what does my child need, and that type of responsiveness kind of deepens the relationship. And when we have that type of relationship, it actually lets us use our most powerful tool, and that is modeling for them. That we model for them what it means to be an adult in the world. So our role is to journey with them, and that this journey through life happens within the life of the church. It's the church is in our home, and our home is connected to the church. So there's this natural kind of way that we are just living our lives as faithful stewards, learning, repenting, and loving and praying, and they're walking alongside us. And as they grow, if they're free to ask questions, if they get a sense that my parents care about who I am more than just how I behave, it naturally allows an environment where they are going to be transitioning, moving from being a kid to being an adult. So I keep reminding myself as I think, oh my gosh, I got to fix my child, or oh my gosh, that behavior has to change, or oh my gosh, how could they think that? I just remind myself, they're not problems we need to fix. I don't need to impose a faith on this child. I need to trust that as I live my life within the life of the church and have this child alongside and communicate that type of love, respect, including setting limits, that the truth, the Holy Spirit kind of works. These are God's children as well. And that frees me up from a fear, or trying to control them. And it really it kind of allows this process to go. But I don't want to make it sound that pretty, because it's pretty bumpy at times. When they say no, or where I say no, that creates what I might call a natural tension of that struggle of growing and learning.
I mean, Dr. Mamalakis, what would you say to parents who sort of struggle with the fact that the values of the world don't exactly align with the values of faith? That, as you're trying to walk alongside them and model who we are in our faith, bringing the church into our home, that kids don't naturally sort of always align themselves with that, especially in adolescence, right? When they're sort of figuring out, well, who am I in relation to these values? And this is who my parents are, but I don't know who I am. And oftentimes they're sort of trying on a lot of hats that may not align with the things that we're most concerned of, and sort of this delicate balance between giving them this freedom and responsibility to really decide who they are, a lot of freedom in that without overly directing them, but really still being connected with some level of guide, help, that control, responsibility for their soul, um, and to sort of learn these things as they go.
I want to highlight a few things. Number one, they're trying on a bunch of hats. And that's a normal process. But sometimes they put on one hat, and I might freak out because that's a wrong hat, and forget that they're kind of trying on some hats. And that's a normal process. I think as parents, we want to prepare them to go out into the world, not protect them from the world. And we want to give them a taste of what's good and true and real. So, and that taste comes from a home that's connected to the church, that our home follows rules. Our home follows God's commandments. Our home defers to Christ, his church, in understanding what's true and real. That's what we do. And they're going to grow up in a home where mom and dad aren't the final authority. And what mom and dad want are not the final authority. They're going to grow up in a home where Christ, his church, is the final authority. Will that be a good experience for them? Well, what I believe is that if it is a positive experience, meaning do they feel that freedom to ask questions, right? The freedom to learn, the freedom to make a mistake and learn how to repent. They will taste what's true and real, that the truth doesn't impose itself. The truth is what we live out of and what we love out of. And we do that by setting limits and being responsive, right? By listening and saying no, all within the life of the church. So when they ask us, they go out in the world and say, what about this? I can say, what do you think about that? And I can say, well, here's what we do, and here's why, because God is this. And we give them a way to understand the world. If their home isn't a place where they feel known and loved, they're not going to want to live within that world. But if it's a world where they feel known and loved, and again, loved isn't just listening and delighting, it's setting limits, they will taste what's real and true. And as Orthodox parents, we want to trust that when we are living as repentant parents in the life of the church, that means our kids are going to see us make mistakes and see us repent. They're going to see us not behave one way in church and then another way at home. We want to be real and authentic, and for us as Orthodox, that kind of means repentant, because they're going to authentically see me make a mistake. And when they see that and taste that in the context of I'm taking care of them, I'm respecting them, and I'm teaching them how to respect me, that's going to taste really nice. And so when they go out in the world, they're going to try on different hats, and we're going to look. And we have friends in Florida who own an organic farm. And they tell me about how I was down in Florida, and they made the salad for the parenting talk I was giving. And I ate the salad, and those tomatoes in that salad were the best tomatoes I've ever had. I thought, I don't think I've ever had a tomato before. And I told them, I bet you don't have to force your kids to eat organic tomatoes. I bet you don't have to. I bet you don't worry that when your kids grow up, they're going to start eating bad tomatoes. what you've given them is a taste of what a real tomato is. And so when they go out in the world, they know the difference between a real tomato and a false one. And they said, you're right. My kids are like tomato elitists. They go, that's not a real tomato. This is the gospel of Christ. It's a real tomato. We don't have to tell our kids, you've got to eat this tomato. We need to invite them to taste and see. And that comes specifically us living the faith, us being responsive to them, us setting limits. And then as these conversations happen, we teach them the reason we do this is because who God is and what God has revealed about us, about what is true, about who is true, He's true, and about what truth is. And then when they go out in the world, and we want to be the source for them to come back and say, why do people do that? Or how do we understand that? And we say, well, not everyone knows what God teaches, and not everyone follows what God says. And there's plenty of opportunities where to see what happens when we don't learn what God teaches and we don't follow what God teaches.
Right. If you're joining us, we're speaking to Phillip Mamalakis, parenting our adolescents, a topic that I know that many of you have called in or asking for us to do a show on this, and so dedicated the show to doing this. We'd love to hear from you. So feel free to call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. If you'd like to ask Dr. Phil, we will honor that desire and that wish. I do simply let our producer know when you call in that you'd rather remain anonymous, and we'll definitely answer the question. You can also email us a question during the live broadcast of our show by going to your email provider and putting in ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. Dr. Mamalakis, let's kind of go a little bit deeper with this, just because I know that a lot of parents are dealing with this right now, and that is, how do we handle dating in adolescence?
That's a great conversation to have as kids grow up, because they're going to start coming home if they're close to us, and their friends are going to start dating, or they'll say, well, Johnny likes so and so, and that's a great context for helping them understand about friendships, about desires, and about relationships. And so I love asking my kids, why do people date? And what's nice about dating, and are there any dangers of dating? Because oftentimes this stuff will start in middle school. And it's hard, because if everyone is dating, then the person who's not dating will feel like there's something wrong with them, which is actually upside down. But if they feel connected to you as a parent, and they have friendships and, pareja, right, groups, we can actually help them reflect that, actually, why do people do that, and what happens there? And we can teach them, actually, dating is something we do, when we're older and we're thinking about a long-term relationship. That really, you're going to have feelings of attraction towards people, and that's nice, but, that's to have really good friendships is not when we act on those desires. It's really when we respect people as persons. And when we give kids that understanding, they can start observing what happens to a group of friends when two of them start to date and they have an exclusive relationship and they separate themselves. You say, well, it kind of ruins the whole group. And if you're dating one person, does that mean you can't have any other friends of the opposite sex? And because that's true and real, they can start learning that, oh, you're right. It doesn't make sense. It actually undermines the group. That it's good to have a lot of friends who are of the same sex and of the opposite sex. And so then just imagine that conversation before you might set a limit and say, no, you are not permitted to date, or, when you can give me a good reason for dating, I would support it, or what makes you want to date. And just you're inviting them to reflect and to think. And what you're teaching them is, all right, really, these are persons. It might be a girl or it might be a boy, but that's a person. And we want to learn to respect someone as a person for who they are, and recognize that relationships, marriage itself, at its foundations, is a love of a person, and that the attractions to each other are not the foundation of a marriage. In fact, marriage is fundamentally a friendship. Most of our time as married couple is spent working together, going through life together. And we want to teach them that this is why we have guidelines on dating.
I think Dr. Mamalakis, and I think it's so important for our listeners to hear this, how much you engage your teen in the conversation. In other words, you're not talking to them, you're actually engaging them in the conversation with questions. Well, what do you think the relationship would look like? What are we hearing? What are we seeing in this world? And actually having them part of it, because I think one of the big times that we have as parents that we kind of hate the same or hate that we were doing as adolescents, as infants, as we do with adolescents. And I think, there are a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences in the sense that we, when we engage them and want to have them part of the conversation, I feel like they feel more valued, they feel more part of the conversation and more honored. And that's something that, even for our listeners, I love how you're highlighting that for us to do.
They feel respected. Like, my dad respects me enough to ask me what I think. And that's really powerful, because we are preparing our kids to go out in the world, which means they need to think. And what's really interesting to me is I ask my kids, well, what do you see? What do you notice among your peers? What happens when kids do that? And it's the same with drugs or alcohol, marijuana and cigarettes. What happens when they do that? Instead of some rigid rule that says don't just say no, which is where we're going to get to, we want to prepare them to know why it is that we have this rule of just saying no. And so I ask my kids, it's the same with tech. Why are we're not against technology, but I ask, what do you think I'm against? What's wrong? What's bad use of a cell phone, and what's an appropriate use of a cell phone? Because we can't protect kids from the world. We want to prepare them. And I want my kids to be able to see the dangers and to see the path toward the good. And so as they're going out in the world, I'll ask them, well, what do you see? What do you notice? And when people go off that path, what happens? And we see, anyway.
Dr. Mamalakis, obviously the kids today are sort of facing just so much. I mean, we're talking about dating, talking about technology, but the LGBTQ issue that has become, just I don't know even what to say other than it's a powerful trending force, and our kids are around it, and what for kids in terms of how they handle the issues that they're facing with ideas that relate to LGBTQ and the movements toward that in society.
So this is, in my mind, I think about this as our goal is that we can create a place in our home, we can have a relationship with our kids where they can come to us and say, what do you think? How do I make sense of this? And I tell this to parents, don't get mad at them for leaving their shoes on by the door or for not making their bed, because it doesn't really matter. What matters is they're coming to us with these real issues. So we need to remind them, we need to set limits, we need to say, no, you can't go out until your bed is clean. But we want to build a relationship with them so they come back and say, this seems odd to me, or I'm trying to figure this out. And that's our goal, is to help them internalize their identity as Orthodox Christians and understand what it means to love the world. Second thing is, it can be pretty scary as parents. But if we're scared, we've kind of stepped outside our tradition. Because what Christ teaches us is that the light is stronger than the darkness. And the darkness can't overtake the light. So what I like doing is when they see this aggressiveness with these ideologies, and I even had, one school that is teaching kids, do not tell your parents about this. It's going to such a level. And I said, my answer to that would be, you can tell a 6-year-old, what do you think about someone telling you, don't talk to your mom or dad like that about this? A 6-year-old will say, well, that seems wrong. And I'm like, yep. And what do you do if someone says, don't tell your parents about this? And they're going to say, I'm going to come and tell you. And I'm saying, yep. Because why would you not talk to your mom and dad? And so the same thing about the aggressiveness. Christ does not force people to believe a certain way. But some of these ideologies are so aggressive, it's being forced. So I can ask my kids, are you feeling forced? Why would someone force you to think a certain way or believe a certain way? And right away, we're giving them a taste of an organic tomato because Christ doesn't force. And so they start to get access to what's true inside them. And then we can start saying, well, some people in the world define themselves in these ways. Some people define themselves according to what they're attracted to. And then we say, well, God revealed to us that our identity is to be in Christ. And really, we've already had the conversation about, in relationships with your friends, it's not to meet your desires or to act out on your desires. So why would we define someone according to our desires? And you're like, that makes sense. And then we say, because we want to help them navigate. And so we want them to know that you're going out into a world where some people will really insist that you see things a certain way and believe things a certain way. And we want them to know that that's been the Christian story since the beginning. And now, and sometimes, it can feel pretty lonely being a follower of Christ. Yep, that's true. And so we want them to come to us. We want them to have a circle of other friends who understand that, we don't need to fear these ideologies, right? We need to stay in this, and that helps us understand what we identify in all sorts of ways. But those friends are kind and welcoming and responsive and listening, and our kids feel more comfortable in those groups than they feel either in our home or in our churches. Our kids will naturally feel like, gee, that feels more respectful. So that's where we have to be careful that our churches are places where our teens can ask any question. And we can't be afraid of the questions. I get kids asking me all the time, why is the church against gay marriage? Don't we think that's love? And I say, well, the church isn't against gay marriage. The church has a particular understanding of marriage, that God created marriage as the reunification of a male and a female in Christ. And it's really not about who you're attracted to. It's about what God is doing in terms of a man and a woman being united. But that's not the only relationship that has love. It's good to have loving relationships, but that's a unique understanding of what Christ is doing in creation with a man and a woman. And we are for this understanding of marriage. But we understand not everyone knows what God teaches, and not everyone follows what God teaches.
Right. Call us in at 1-846-237-2346. You can also email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com.
Dr. Phillip, maybe you could talk to the so many parents who are emailing in asking about, level of protection and control over things like movies, types of friends, language, dress, hairstyle. Talk to our parents about what you would recommend in terms of that, again, delicate balance in terms of how much you inflict your ideology on your children.
Did you say inflict our ideology? This is one of the hardest things about parenting teens in my mind, is we need to respect their journey. We need to respect their learning. We need to respect their taste. And so my wife and I are always discussing, if my child wants to grow their hair long, is that something we're going to draw the line on? If they like this particular style, are we going to draw the line there? And that's an ongoing conversation. What's most important is that we don't psychologically control our kids. That is to say, we're going to have to restrict our kids. but we should be restricting their behavior, not their thoughts and their feelings. And the second thing is we try and say, let's be serious about the most important things. And we need to be strict about the most important things. So, for example, how you dress in church, we are more strict than how they dress outside of church. Because this is a sacred space, and we want to teach them that if the president were coming in, we would dress up, and that our clothing has to fit the setting. And this is a sacred setting and an important setting. But, if they want to wear ripped jeans to go out with their friends, it's like, are we gonna have an issue with that?
Mm-hmm.
The other most important things are, church being a mandatory part of our lives. That school is not optional. Stealing and lying, those aren't optional. Church is not optional.
What we make on that, though, tell me, I had 3 parents just in the last 2 weeks say, "How do I make my kids go to church? They don't want to come to church, and I keep telling them we need to go, and they refuse to go."
Right.
I mean, talk to these parents.
So, if we're making our kids do a lot of stuff, it's hard to also make them go to church, number one. Number two, if the church is not coming into the home, it's hard to make your kids go to church. If church is like going to a museum, kids hate museums. It's just a place you go with all this ancient stuff that you have to behave quietly, and it's really boring. If their experience of church is as a museum, that's really hard to force them. But if their experience of church is like a hospital, you don't have to force kids to go to a hospital. They'll know this is intimately connected to who I am and how I live. So what we want to do is we want to bring the church into our daily lives. We do that with the external practices of the church and the internal life of the church. Do we do prayers? Do we do prayers before meals? Do they have an icon by their bed? Are we practicing patience, kindness, forgiveness, and self-control? Are we modeling them the inner life of the church? And, are we reading the gospel on the way to church? So the more the church enters our home, the more the church will feel like their home. And so oftentimes, by the time they're seniors, if church has been kind of an appendix, like an extra thing in the family, it's not really relevant to them. But we force them to go to school. And how do we force our kids to go to school when they want us to go to? They don't want to go to school. My son just called me before this call and said, "Can I skip school tomorrow?" And I was in the middle of something. And I'm like, I answered the phone to make sure it wasn't an emergency. And his question was, "Can I skip school tomorrow?" And I didn't have time to find out what he's talking about. I said, "It's not an emergency. The answer is no, and I'll call you back." And so that, but that comes out of the relationship.
Right.
We want, and is it the most important thing? I don't think it's, if you're at that point with a teenager, I would want them to experience the church as relevant, which is as important as making Sunday mornings mandatory.
I love that answer. That's a beautiful answer.
I think too that the adolescent and parent relationship is so much, based on how much we're able to influence really does sort of, I'm sure you would agree, Dr. Phillip, that it stems out of the relationship. When kids experience the sort of quality of that relationship, just like in a marriage, I mean, things go better when we have a good friendship. We tend to give each other the benefit of the doubt. We tend to not sort of create this negative narrative about our spouse all the time. When we've really worked on that, the warmth and the respect in the relationship, and there's warmth, the firm expectations, right? All that sort of connection before we're correcting. I feel that relationship lays the foundation for allowing the relationship to influence. Without that, don't you find that it is very hard for parent or parental values to influence the relationship? It's not strong.
Absolutely. It's that relationship. that relationship of respect, support, acceptance. And then we have to recognize that that relationship will have moments of tension. Mm-hmm. They will be upset at us. They will say, this is the worst, family on the planet. Mm-hmm. Or you don't know what you're talking about. Or they're nonverbals. The way they look at us sometimes, or they're just in a bad mood. If any adult treated us like that, it would be completely unacceptable.
Right.
And so this is where it's important that we don't need our kids to like us. Mm-hmm. We need them to respect us. And we teach that by respecting them.
And so, and you mentioned this earlier, but then when we're correcting so many things, it becomes, like picking up the shoes, clean up your mess, do this, do that, right? So the relationship becomes about all of these commands, it's really hard to sort of command the important things, right? Because
that's right.
Becomes the tune out.
Because everything seems to be important. We have a rule in our home: feelings before fasting. Mm. Because we want to teach our children fasting. That's a beautiful spiritual discipline that actually helps marriages thrive. Because it teaches us not to act on our impulses, not to have our life based on serving ourselves, and it ties in our daily life into our spiritual journey, and that just strengthens marriage. And so we want to teach our children prayer and fasting and repentance. But if we never check in with them, when they come home and they drop their backpack or they go right to their room, and we don't pay attention to what's going on their inside, and we're more concerned about their behavior. Your bag doesn't go there. You can't isolate. Are you on your phone again? We as parents, I think, need to respect their inner life, respect their feelings. It looks like you had a tough day. And we don't need to talk all the time. What I learned as a dad is they can feel my presence. I don't need to talk. Now, I want to talk. I want to be telling them what to do all the time. But they don't learn from my talking. They experience my presence, which can be a healing, peaceful presence, which helps them kind of learn and grow.
Mm-hmm. I think what you just said was really important, that it is a peaceful presence. I think so often today, parents are navigating so much, and the amount of pressure and stress that parents are under often makes them not a peaceful presence. And so in the nonverbals is often a tension that you could cut with a knife. And I think that makes it really difficult for kids to share their inner world, because their perception is there's no room for it. There's already so many emotions present in this room. So I better just keep all of this inside.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of walking in the room and they're on their phones again. And I'm guilty of saying, you're on your phone again. Why are you always on their phone? And they're like, and there's a lot to be fearful about. And that's why I'm really cautious not to talk too much about how scary the world is or the scary tech. No, because perfect love casts out fear. Right. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to parent out of my fear. I want to find that peace that comes from Christ. But that's a daily challenge for me. So when I see him on the phone, instead of commenting on the phone, I just go over, either touch them or just stand there and check in with them. Or even set a timer. I'll give them 5 more minutes. Or just check in. Because when I'm, you notice their mistakes more than you notice them as a person.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to go to the phone lines. We have a phone call coming in.
Welcome. Are you there? Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, welcome live with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking my call. Thank you also so much for this valuable program. I've been really enjoying listening to it. And my question is that, you're talking about establishing a preeminence of relationship and not overcorrecting at every stage. My question is, what do you do when there's already a course in motion and you find that you need to course correct? Maybe you don't have that habit already in place with your child. You don't have that relationship or that credence. What do you do, again, when you need to course correct, and how should that look?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And that's an opportunity to teach our children. Because my son told me, he's a pretty smart guy, and he calls me out all the time. I decided to course correct, that I'm going to set a limit where I didn't set before. And he goes, you used to say that was okay. And I told him, yup. And I learned that I'm going to do something different because that wasn't good. And I say that because I want to give us permission as parents to improve, to learn, and to course correct. So, and it depends on the corrections that we're doing. Like, I think one of the best corrections is to talk less and to be present more. And so whatever we're going to do in addition to that, we should also do that. I think of all the course correction I knew with technology. It's gotten too bad, or I didn't do it. I didn't start in the right way, or, I haven't set limits to my kid. Well, we want to start slow. Start slow. You don't have to impose a whole new program. Start imposing pieces. Number two, with our kids, we can involve them, in this process. And I can tell my kids, you know what? I think I haven't done that in the best way. Or, you know what? I'm thinking I need to change how we're doing because this isn't working. What do you think? We're not expecting them to have an adult conversation, but we want that to communicate that I respect you enough, like that. And then with consultation, because I don't know how you course correct without someone guiding, right? So we talk to other parents, we talk to a priest, we talk to a therapist and understand, what do I want to start doing? Once we do that, we expect resistance. If they've gotten comfortable with having their way, it's really hard for them to relinquish that. If there's another parent in the home, it's best if it's done with two parents. But we want to implement gradually and expect resistance and stay peaceful and stay strong. And then when we do that, we do what the parenting book talks about. We can say, I know this is hard, but this needs to happen this way. And we step into our authority as parents. And we might have to remind ourselves, I am not a terrible parent. I don't need my child to like me, but this has to be this way. This is the new rule. So each one of us needs to learn different aspects of that path. Some of us need to learn not to speak. Some of us learn to be strict with our kids because we may be afraid to get strict. Each one of us has to learn something different, which is where consultation really helps.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna, for your call. We appreciate it.
It looks like we've got a possibility of another call coming in. Caller, are you there? Okay, looks like that call dropped. Okay, so Dr. Phillips, so one of the emails that we've gotten in is people who obviously love the Parenting Toward the Kingdom book, but the biggest question they had was, how do you adapt many of the principles in that book for a 15, 16, 17-year-old?
That's a great question. Because some of the principles, for example, are really appropriate, like thinking long term. And you remember how you mentioned that they're trying on different hats. Well, if we're freaking out at every step of this process, that's not respectful to the process. So I always have to remind myself when my kid says, how do we even know God exists? Or I don't believe in God. Or, I think that couple who's, has a different idea of marriage, I think they're right. Thinking long term means respecting their process, respecting their learning. I don't have to fix it today. I'm going to stay the course because we are preparing our kids for the world. Responding, not reacting, is probably one of the biggest things with my teenagers because my teenagers seem to be able to push my buttons in a way that a toddler was not able to. And I think about...
There's that comes in when people hit the age of 13 that it was not present when they were 7 and 8. And I think it's huge. So we got quite a few emails about the handling of this, that, what kids see in the world in terms of the way their parents may speak to each other suddenly become the way they feel permission to speak at home. How do you encourage parents to handle the disrespect?
Number one, I would caution us calling it disrespect. I would suggest our children are learning to respect us. And remember, they're trying on different hats. So part of the parenting book is, remember, separate your struggle from your child's struggle. So we got to recognize exploding or demanding, that's not necessarily the best way to teach them. Recognizing that when they're out with their friends, they're feeling independent, they're feeling like an adult, they can do what they want. And then they come home and they're going to feel like a 6-year-old child. That's a really tough transition. Mm-hmm. So I allow a little bit of transition time. Mm-hmm. But and then the third thing is I ask them, you just say, we don't talk like that, or what's going on? They'll talk. It's like, what's going on? Or no, thank you. Or, that's not, we don't talk like that. I'm not mad. It's just gentle. If we notice they're upset, we can say, it's okay to be upset. It's not okay to talk to me like that. Mm-hmm. Correcting is the last thing we do.
It sounds like you have a strong boundary, though, in the emotion of them not becoming your emotion, right? And that because to be able to say those things, you can't also be feeling in that moment, right? Does it feel like you're sort of intentional about that boundary?
So the parenting book talks about separating my struggle from my kids' struggle. And I've been parenting now for 28 years. There's a long process of me repenting and going back and saying, why did I freak out? It's just a kid. How do I get hooked? We have a rule in our home, only one 12-year-old at a time. Like, it's okay for the 12-year-old to act like a 12-year-old. It's not okay for the adults to act like a 12-year-old. And so it's a process of repenting. It's a process of saying, I got hooked by a 12-year-old. That's not necessary. And that process, you said it beautifully, is that boundary. Because I want, and I remind myself, they will become an adult, just not today. So my rule is I try not to get upset and try not to react, but I try and comment on it every time. No, thank you. Not appropriate. Try that again. We don't talk like that. And if it happens a second time or third time, I'll give a warning. If I hear that one more time, then usually I'm going to confiscate a cell phone, or usually they're going to lose a privilege. But I always try and check in with them, because if it's coming from a place like, give them some slack when they're out in the world and now they're feeling restricted at home, or if they had a hard day and they're really struggling or they're stressed about an exam, I'm not going to do anything except gentle reminders and checking in. But when they're just a bad habit, it's a warning and it's a removal of privilege to communicate.
And I think that's an important differentiation, that is it a habit or is there something underneath? I find so often that learning to respect is often sort of rooted in needs they don't realize that are not met in their life, and it kind of comes out in how they're reacting, right? Instead of responding to use your words, right? So I love that differentiation you're making, that, is this really a habit or pattern, or is this just a struggle that they don't know how to articulate? And that becomes our role to teach in that moment, them to recognize what's really going on beneath the surface.
We don't want to miss their inner life because they used an inappropriate word.
Right.
So I tell them all the time, you may not talk to your mother like that. If you're upset, she wants you to tell her, I'm upset. Use your words. And the other piece is sometimes they're just trying on a silly hat, and all it needs is like a no thank you, and they're like, got it. It's like they come to their senses again.
So such good wisdom, Dr. Phillip. I think I'd love to have you on the show all the time. I think you just offer so many words of wisdom. And again, for our listeners, I do encourage you, if you have not picked up this book, to definitely do so. Parenting Towards the Kingdom. You can find it at store.ancientfaith.com. Dr. Phillip Mamalakis is just a tremendous wealth of knowledge. And, I think what I love about you, Dr. Mamalakis, is not only your wisdom, but also your passion by which you speak, and your vulnerability that you share, not only on our show, but also in the book. And so I think that it inspires all of us. And so thank you so much for taking the time to join us on our show tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. And I do delight in talking about this, because aren't the kids such a value to us? They're like the most important thing. And God is working in us as we're learning to parent our kids. And that's
absolutely
beautiful.
They're the future of our church, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again, Dr. Mamalakis. And I want to thank Matushka Trudy for always producing our show right here on Ancient Faith. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us this evening. If you've enjoyed the show, we do encourage you to join our social media platforms that you can find all under the headings of The Louhs, as well as receive our daily inspirational messages. Again, you can find those by going to our website at thelouhs.com and clicking on the subscribe button. That's all you have to do. And every single morning at 7 a.m., you'll receive a daily word of encouragement. Next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the holidays. And I can't believe we're even saying that already.
I can't believe it.
It's unbelievable. It's right around the corner. And oftentimes we call this the most wonderful time of the year, but at times it could be the most stressful time of the years. So we're going to be speaking with a great therapist and friend of ours, Sylvia Farish, who's going to be speaking to us about holidays and coping with the stress of the holidays. So definitely you don't want to miss it next Tuesday at 8 p.m. right here on Live with the Louhs. Friends, God bless you all and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelouhs.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Louhs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with the Louhs is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jeannie Constantinou, host of the live call-in show, Search the Scriptures Live on